I'll never forget the moment it happened. It was one of those warm summer evenings at my sister's house, the kind where the air smells of grilled burgers and fresh-cut grass. My whole family was there, cousins, uncles, nieces, the works. We only get together like this once a year, so the energy was buzzing. People were laughing, catching up, kids were running through sprinklers in the backyard. It was supposed to be a day about family, about belonging. But then it happened. I was sitting at the picnic table, paper plate balanced on my knee, when my nephew Tyler, 17 years old and always looking for attention, decided to make me the butt of his latest joke. He leaned back in his chair, flashing that teenage smirk that makes you want to roll your eyes, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Uncle Dan, why do you even bother coming to these? You'll be dead soon anyway." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. For a moment, there was silence. A stunned kind of silence where you wonder if you heard correctly. Then, as if on cue, the laughter erupted. My cousins chuckled. My sister Ellen gave a nervous little laugh. Even a couple of my older relatives cracked smiles. To them, it was just a teenage boy trying to be funny. But to me, it wasn't funny, not even a little. I felt a heat rise in my chest, not from anger, but from something heavier, something that stung deeper than any joke ever should. It wasn't just that Tyler had said it. It was that nobody thought to defend me. Nobody said, "Hey, that's too far," or "Don't talk to him like that." Instead, they all laughed, as if my mortality, my very existence, was just a punchline. I caught Tyler's eye for a moment. He looked almost proud of himself, basking in the attention. His mother, my younger sister Ellen, shook her head but didn't say a word. That stung more than I wanted to admit. She used to defend me when we were kids. Now she couldn't even tell her son to stop mocking me. I glanced around the table. My son, Caleb, was there too, standing off to the side with his drink, staring down into the cup as if it held answers. He didn't laugh, but he didn't speak up either. That silence burned just as much as the laughter. He and I had been distant for years, but in that moment, I wished he would have stood beside me. And then there was my mother. Our mother, Margaret. She was 84, frail, but sharp as a tack. She sat in her chair under the shade of the old oak tree, hands folded in her lap. She didn't laugh. She just gave me a small, tired smile, the kind only mothers can give, like she wanted to say, "I know, son. I know it hurts." I tried to brush it off. I really did. I forced a smile, took another bite of my burger, pretended it didn't matter, but inside? Inside, I was crumbling. The truth is, ever since my wife passed away 5 years ago, I'd been fighting a quiet battle with loneliness. Family gatherings were supposed to remind me that I still belonged somewhere, that I was still part of something bigger. Instead, in one sentence, Tyler reminded me of something I'd been trying not to think about. I was aging. My health wasn't what it used to be, and maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have many more reunions left. That night, when I drove home alone, I couldn't get his words out of my head. "You'll be dead soon anyway." The way everyone laughed, as if it was harmless. But words aren't harmless. They stick. They echo. And as I sat in my quiet house, staring at the framed photos of my students from the years I'd spent teaching history, I thought about something that cut even deeper. My family might not care how I'm remembered. But those kids, the ones I mentored, encouraged, believed in, they did. They always did. It was in that moment I made a decision that would change everything. The laughter from that reunion would be the last time anyone in my family underestimated me. Because before I left this world, I was going to make one final choice, a choice they'd never forget. When you're 62, you start to see family gatherings differently than you did when you were young. They're no longer just an excuse for free food and catching up with cousins. They become mile markers, moments you quietly count, wondering how many more you'll get to see. That's exactly how I felt as I pulled into my sister Ellen's driveway that afternoon. Her house had always been the heart of our reunions. 2 stories, white shutters, a yard big enough for the kids to run wild. I parked at the curb and sat there for a minute, watching through the windshield as little ones darted through sprinklers, squealing, their parents calling after them with half-hearted warnings not to slip. The smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs drifted into the air, mixing with freshly cut grass. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the nerves. Don't get me wrong, I love my family, but ever since my wife, Claire, passed away 5 years ago, I've felt like a guest at these things rather than a part of them. Everyone else had their spouses, their children, their routines. Me? I had my memories and an empty house waiting when it was all over. Still, I forced myself to smile as I walked through the gate. Ellen spotted me right away, her hands dusted with flour from prepping one of her famous pies. She bustled over, hugging me tightly. "Danny, you made it. I was starting to think you'd flake on me again," she teased, but there was warmth in her voice. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, patting her back. Ellen has always been the glue of our family, the one to host holidays, to call everyone with reminders, to scold us if we didn't show up. Younger than me by 7 years, but sometimes she feels more like the older sibling. Her son, Tyler, was leaning against the deck railing, surrounded by cousins his age. He gave me a quick nod before turning back to his friends, already spinning some story that had them all laughing. Tyler had always been the jokester, the type to test boundaries for a laugh. At 17, he was tall, broad-shouldered, confident in a way I never was at that age. "Uncle Dan," my cousin Michael called from the grill, flipping burgers. "Grab yourself a beer. You look like you need it." I waved back and made my way over, grabbing a cold one from the cooler. That's when I spotted my son, Caleb. Caleb was standing off to the side, phone in hand, half present. He was 34 now, but in my eyes he was still that awkward kid who used to follow me around the garage while I fixed up old cars. We'd drifted apart over the years, my fault as much as his. I was strict when he was young, too wrapped up in work, too proud to apologize when things went wrong. When Claire died, I thought maybe grief would bring us closer. Instead, it built another wall. He'd come today, but I could see the distance in his eyes even before he said hello. "Hey, Dad," he said, giving me a quick handshake instead of a hug. "Glad you made it," I replied, searching for words to fill the space, but he was already glancing back at his phone. Then I saw her. My mother, Margaret, sitting in her chair beneath the old oak tree, her white cardigan buttoned despite the heat. At 84, she was fragile, her movements slower, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She raised her hand when she saw me, and I went to her right away. "Hi, Mom," I said, crouching beside her chair. "You look tired, Danny," she said softly, brushing a hand over mine. "You working yourself too hard, even in retirement." I chuckled. "Just the opposite, actually, too much free time." She gave me a knowing smile. "Then use it wisely. Time doesn't wait for anyone." That line stuck with me. My mother always had a way of saying things that landed heavier than you expected. The afternoon carried on the way reunions do. Kids screaming, people retelling the same old stories, cousins comparing jobs, new babies being passed around. For a while, I let myself enjoy it. I laughed when my cousin's toddler ran face first into the sprinkler. I helped Ellen carry out the trays of potato salad. I even tried to make small talk with Caleb, though it mostly fell flat. But underneath it all, I felt a familiar ache. It was the same ache I felt when I left these reunions every year, the ache of being an outsider in my own family. Everyone else seemed to have carved out their place, their importance. Me? I was just Uncle Dan, the quiet one, the retired teacher, the widower. And that was the setting, that was the stage. I didn't know it then, But before the night was over, my place in the family would feel smaller than ever. All it would take was one cruel joke. The sun had started to dip lower by the time we all gathered around the long wooden picnic table in Ellen's backyard. The food was spread out across the surface. Burgers, corn on the cob, Ellen's pie cooling at the far end. Everyone squeezed in, kids on one side, adults on the other, plates stacked high. I found myself between my mother, who was quietly picking at her potato salad, and Caleb, who had finally put his phone away. For a moment, I let myself believe it was going to be one of those rare evenings where I felt like I truly belonged. Then Tyler opened his mouth. It started harmless enough. He was riffing on everyone at the table, tossing out little jokes to get laughs from his cousins, the kind of cocky teenage humor that relies on being just a little mean. He teased his sister about how long it took her to get ready in the morning, mocked one of his cousins for spilling soda down his shirt. Everyone chuckled, rolled their eyes, played along. Then his gaze landed on me. "Uncle Dan," he said, leaning forward with that grin that meant trouble. "What's the point of you even being here? I mean, you'll be dead soon, anyway." The words hit like a slap. The table went still for half a beat, as if everyone was waiting to see how I'd respond. Then, almost as if on cue, the laughter broke out. Ellen gave a nervous chuckle, shaking her head. Michael nearly choked on his beer. A couple of the teenagers snickered. Even Caleb let out a small breath through his nose. Maybe not a laugh, but not a defense either. I sat there frozen, staring at Tyler. His grin widened when he saw everyone else laughing. He thought he was the life of the party, the center of attention. To him, I was just another punchline. I forced a smile, but inside, my stomach twisted. I could feel the heat rising in my face, the sting of humiliation spreading through my chest. I wanted to say something, to shut him down, to remind him I wasn't just some old man waiting to die, but the words caught in my throat. "Tyler," Ellen finally scolded, though her voice lacked conviction. "That's not nice." But she was still smiling, as if her son's cruelty was just a silly joke. My mother didn't laugh, she didn't smile. She just placed her frail hand over mine beneath the table, squeezing gently. It was the smallest gesture, but it was the only one that made me feel human in that moment. I looked at Caleb, hoping, begging for him to step in, to tell his cousin he'd gone too far, to show me that, just once, he was on my side. But Caleb avoided my eyes. He stabbed at his food with his fork, pretending he hadn't heard. That silence cut deeper than Tyler's words. I told myself not to make a scene. I told myself to swallow it, to laugh it off like everyone else. But inside, something cracked. It wasn't just Tyler's joke. It was every time I'd been dismissed, overlooked, treated as though my years of teaching, my sacrifices for this family, my very presence meant nothing. The laughter around me blurred into noise. The smell of grilled food turned sour in my nose. For the first time in my life, I felt invisible at my own family table. I excused myself early that night, telling Ellen I wasn't feeling well. She patted my arm, distracted, already moving on to another conversation. Tyler didn't even notice me leaving. Caleb gave me a quick nod, his eyes back on his phone. As I walked to my car, I felt an ache I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just sadness. It was betrayal. On the drive home, Tyler's words replayed over and over in my mind. "You'll be dead soon anyway." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the laughter echoing in my ears like a cruel soundtrack. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew something inside me had shifted. That joke hadn't just embarrassed me. It had opened a wound I couldn't ignore anymore. For years, I'd told myself family meant everything. That blood was thicker than water. That no matter the distance with Caleb, or the way Ellen overlooked me, or the silence I lived in since Claire passed away, at least I had family. But that night, sitting in my quiet house, I realized something terrifying. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I never really had. And that thought, cold, heavy, unshakable, was the beginning of a choice I never imagined I'd make. When I got home that night, the house felt emptier than usual. It always did after family gatherings. I walked into the kitchen, dropped my keys on the counter, and stood there for a long moment, staring at the silence around me. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. It was the kind of quiet that presses down on you, the kind that makes every thought louder. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. That's when Tyler's words came rushing back, sharper than before. "You'll be dead soon anyway." And the laughter that followed, my own flesh and blood, treating my mortality like a punchline. I looked at the photographs lining the wall, little reminders of the life I had built. There was the one of Claire and me on our wedding day, her veil caught in the wind. Another of Caleb when he was 10, holding up the first fish he ever caught. And in between those, dozens of photos of my students. Yearbook shots, snapshots of field trips, letters they'd written me thanking me for believing in them. I got up, walked into my study, and pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a manila folder labeled Estate. I'd put it together a few years back, after Claire passed. My will was in there, neatly typed, leaving everything I had, my modest house, my savings, the life insurance, to Caleb and, by extension, the family. It wasn't much, but it was something. A lifetime of careful saving and modest living. I sat there with the folder in front of me, my hands trembling. For years, I had assumed leaving it all to family was the right thing to do. It's what everyone expects, isn't it? You live, you work, you save, and when your time comes, you pass it all down to your children and siblings. That's the script. That's the tradition. But what had my family given me in return? At the reunion, I wasn't treated like a man who had lived 62 years with dignity. I was treated like a relic, an old man fading out, good only for a laugh. And then I thought of my students. The kids who still sent me Christmas cards even years after graduating. The ones who came back to visit me at school, telling me how my classes had inspired them to go to college, to believe in themselves, to push harder. The kids who respected me, not because they had to, but because I had earned it. That's when the idea planted itself. What if my legacy wasn't meant for family who didn't care? What if it was meant for the students who did? I leaned back in my chair, the decision crystallizing in my mind. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing Tyler or making Ellen feel guilty. It was about dignity, about leaving behind something that mattered. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer the next morning. His name was Richard Hale, a man I'd trusted for years. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and professional. "Daniel, good to hear from you. Everything all right?" "I need to make a change," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "To my will." There was a pause. "Of course. What kind of change?" "I don't want my estate going to my family anymore. I want it donated. To the high school where I taught. Set up a scholarship fund in my name. For kids who need it." Richard was quiet for a moment as if weighing my tone. Finally, he said, "That's a big decision. You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." 2 days later, I was sitting across from him in his office, signing the papers. My hand shook a little as I wrote my name, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. When it was done, Richard looked at me carefully. "You know your family will be upset when they find out." I nodded. They already made their choice. Now I've made mine. Driving home from his office, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop chasing validation from people who will never give it, and instead pour your love into those who truly value it. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the flickering glow of the lamp, and whispered to Claire's picture on the mantel, "I hope you'd be proud of me. I think this is what you'd want." And for the first time in years, I felt like I'd taken control of my story. I didn't know when my time would come, but when it did, my family would learn the truth. Not from me, but from the legacy I chose to leave behind. The church smelled faintly of lilies and old wood. Light poured through the stained glass windows, scattering colors across the pews where my family sat in hushed tones. My casket rested at the front, draped in white flowers. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but I can imagine how it must have looked. A quiet man laid to rest, surrounded by family who believed they knew exactly what would happen next. They thought they knew me. My sister Ellen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though whether they were tears of grief or exhaustion, I'll never know. She was seated in the front row. Tyler slouched beside her, his suit a size too big, his posture screaming boredom. His eyes wandered the room, scanning faces, as if this was just another gathering he had to endure. Caleb sat on the other side of the aisle, hands folded tightly, his jaw clenched. He looked older than I remembered. Grief has a way of doing that. My mother, Margaret, was there too, frail in her chair, her hands trembling as she clutched a rosary. After the service, people gathered in the church hall for coffee and sandwiches, the way families always do. But the real moment came later, in the conference room of Richard Hale's law office. My lawyer, my friend, the man who held the envelope that would turn their world upside down. The family filed in, the air heavy with expectation. Ellen adjusted her blazer, eyes red but sharp. Tyler dropped into his chair with a sigh, already tugging at his tie. Caleb sat quietly, staring at the table as if bracing himself. Richard cleared his throat, unfolding the papers before him. Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here to read Daniel Mercer's will. The room fell into silence. He began with the formalities, the legal language that made everyone shift impatiently in their seats, and then he got to the heart of it. I, Daniel Mercer, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my final will and testament. Tyler smirked, nudging Ellen with his elbow. I can almost hear him whispering, "Here we go." College fund, new car, maybe even the house. But then Richard's voice grew deliberate, steady, each word striking like a hammer. I leave my entire estate, including my home, savings, and possessions, not to my family, but to Millstone High School, where I had the privilege of teaching for over 3 decades. It is my wish that these funds establish the Daniel Mercer Scholarship to support students in financial need so that they may have the opportunities I fought to give them in life. The room froze. Ellen's eyes widened. What? Her voice cracked, more disbelief than grief. Tyler sat up straighter, the smirk evaporating. You're joking, he said, looking around for support. This has to be some kind of mistake. Richard adjusted his glasses, unfazed. There is no mistake. Your uncle signed this document in my presence. His wishes are clear. Ellen shook her head furiously. No, he wouldn't do this. He wouldn't just give everything away. Not to strangers. They're not strangers, Caleb finally said, his voice low but firm. All eyes turned to him. They're his students. They respected him more than we ever did. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Tyler's face flushed crimson. He clenched his fists, shifting in his chair. This is insane. He's family. We're family. He owed it to us. Richard's tone was calm but final. Your uncle didn't owe anyone anything. He made this choice of his own free will. Ellen covered her mouth, her shoulders trembling, with anger, guilt, maybe both. Margaret, silent until now, whispered something so soft it was almost lost in the tension. He did what he thought was right. And in that moment, the weight of my choice came crashing down on them. For Tyler, the boy who mocked me, it was a lesson no lecture could ever deliver. He had expected an inheritance, a reward. Instead, he was left with nothing but the echo of his own cruelty. His words, "You'll be dead soon anyway," had come true sooner than he expected. But the laugh he got that day would be the last one at my expense. For Ellen, It was a mirror held up to years of excusing her son's behavior, of letting disrespect slide. She saw the cost now, written in legal ink. For Caleb, it was something different. Not punishment, not betrayal, but perhaps for the first time, a glimpse of the man his father truly was. Someone who refused to be forgotten. Someone who chose dignity over tradition. When the meeting ended, the family walked out in silence. No one looked at each other. No one spoke. Tyler stormed ahead, his footsteps heavy, his shoulders stiff. Ellen trailed behind, dabbing her eyes. Caleb lingered by the door, his gaze distant but thoughtful. And me? My body was gone, but my voice, my choice, my legacy, they lingered in that room, in those stunned expressions, in the scholarship that would carry my name long after the laughter had faded. The reveal had come, and it had changed everything. The days after the will reading were heavy with silence, not the respectful silence of mourning, but the strained kind, the kind that hangs between family members who no longer know what to say to each other. Ellen tried to hold her head high, but the disappointment was written across her face. At church, she avoided eye contact with neighbors who whispered about the scholarship fund in my name. Tyler, once full of cocky confidence, moved through the halls of that same church with his jaw set and his eyes hard, refusing to speak of what happened. For him, the will wasn't just a legal document, it was a mirror, forcing him to see the weight of his words. He had turned me into a joke. And in the end, I had turned that joke into his lesson. Caleb's reaction was different. In the days that followed, he stopped by my house, the house he would never inherit. He walked through the empty rooms, touching the photos, the shelves of history books, the tools in the garage. According to Richard, he stood in the study for nearly an hour, staring at the folder marked estate. Maybe he was angry. Maybe he was confused. But I like to think he understood that I wasn't shutting him out. I was showing him that a legacy isn't measured by money passed down. It's measured by love, by respect, by the impact you leave on the world. And then there was my mother. Margaret, she didn't fight it, she didn't question it. When people asked her if she was upset, she simply said, "Danny gave his life to teaching. Why wouldn't he give his legacy there too?" Her voice was frail but steady. She understood me better than anyone else, even at the very end. The scholarship launched within months, the Daniel Mercer Scholarship Fund. A modest name, but one that carried weight in the halls of Millston High. Students wrote essays about their dreams, their struggles, their need for a chance. The first recipient was a girl named Ana Ramirez, a bright student with a love of history and no means to pay for college. When she accepted the award at the spring ceremony, she said, "Mr. Mercer believed in students like me, even when we didn't believe in ourselves. Now, his belief will carry me into the future." Those words, that was my real inheritance. Not money, not property, not possessions, but the echo of respect and gratitude. My family, of course, never stopped talking about it. Ellen insisted I'd acted out of spite. Tyler muttered that I'd betrayed the bloodline. But slowly, as the months turned into years, even they couldn't deny the truth. Every time the local paper ran a story about a new scholarship recipient, every time the school added another name to the growing list of students whose lives were changed, my choice spoke louder than their anger. And Caleb, he visited the school one spring. Sat quietly at the back of the scholarship ceremony. He listened to those students tell their stories, saw their tears of gratitude, their parents' pride. He didn't say much that day, but later Richard told me that Caleb stayed long after the event was over, walking the halls where I once taught. He ran his hand along the lockers, peeked into my old classroom, and whispered, "Now I get it, Dad. That's all I ever wanted. For him, for all of them, to understand." The lesson wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about value, about reminding them, and maybe reminding myself, that life is fragile and words carry weight. One careless sentence can cut deeper than you ever imagine. And one choice, One act of defiance can outlive the body that made it. So when people ask what they should take from my story, I hope it's this. Don't measure your legacy by tradition or obligation. Don't waste your love on those who treat it carelessly. Invest in the people who truly see you, who respect you, who value what you bring into this world. Because when the laughter fades, when the room grows quiet, and when your time finally comes, what will remain is not who expected to inherit your wealth, but who carries your name forward with pride. For me, it wasn't Tyler's laughter. It wasn't Ellen's excuses. It wasn't even Caleb's silence. It was Ana Ramirez and every student like her. It was the knowledge that long after the reunion, long after the funeral, long after the arguments died down, somewhere a young person would be standing taller because of me. And that, in the end, was enough. And that's the story of how one careless joke at a family reunion changed everything, not just for me, but for generations of students who will now carry my name into the future. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own family, your own words, or the legacy you want to leave behind, then do me a favor. Like this video so more people can hear it. If you've ever had a moment where someone's words cut deeper than they realized, or if you've learned something about yourself through hardship, share your story in the comments. I read them, and I know others will find strength in your words too. And of course, if you want more stories like this one, real, raw, emotional tales that make you stop and think, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next one. Because stories aren't just entertainment, they're lessons, they're mirrors, they're reminders of what truly matters. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next story.